The 1996 NBA draft is widely considered one of the greatest NBA drafts of all time, with Sports Illustrated rating it as the second greatest draft ever. It includes Hall of Famers like Steve Nash, Ray Allen, and Allen Iverson, and is then stacked full of talent with Jermaine O'Neal, Peja Stojakovic, and Antoine Walker. But these all-time great players were taken all throughout the draft, and some teams, such as the poor Clippers, missed out entirely on these all-time talents. What would happen if the draft was taken perfectly? This video will be an experiment of hindsight, evaluating the careers of players taken and how different the league would have been if this draft was conducted perfectly. And let's start off with the Philadelphia 76ers picking first overall. At the time, the selection of Allen Iverson was 100% correct and paid huge dividends for the franchise. AI took them to the NBA Finals, but they fell to the Los Angeles Lakers and the player who they would select here now, Kobe Bryant. Coming out of high school, Kobe was not a known product, and many teams were worried about the hyper-athletic scoring guard and that he would not pan out in the big league. But we now know what actually happened. One of the greatest careers ever. 33,643 points scored, 5 championships, 18 All-Star games, 15 All-NBA teams, 12 All-Defense teams, 2 scoring titles, and 1 league MVP. It is impossible to deny that Kobe Bryant is one of the greatest players ever, and the Philadelphia 76ers would select him hands down. Young Kobe would join a team where the only real other young talent was fellow scoring shooting guard Jerry Stackhouse. His career would be incredibly different as he would not be immediately joined by the dominant big man Shaquille O'Neal. I imagine Kobe would have come off the bench for the first year like he did in LA before being given a starting role in his second season, and the 76ers would have sucked even more than they did with Iverson in that first year. With AI, the 76ers went 22-60, but it is possible that they do even worse, as AI was their lead scorer with 23 points a game, and young Kobe simply couldn't have matched this production. This would have led the 76ers to the worst record in the league, and they may have gotten the number 1 pick in the draft instead of the number 2 pick, and taken Tim Duncan the next year. Kobe and Duncan would have formed one of the greatest duos in league history, and I doubt there would have been as much beef between Kobe and Tim as there was between Shaq and Kobe. Perhaps they stay in Philly together for their whole careers. Perhaps they win 5+ championships. Or maybe the 76ers never get Duncan, and Kobe has a similar career to AI, scoring a huge amount of points, but just never having the supporting cast to get over the hump and win a championship. Either way, Kobe was in Philly, and would have still been one of the best all time because nothing could have stopped the Mamba. Up next was the Toronto Raptors, who originally took the big man Marcus Camby, who eventually became an amazing defensive player. But if they had their time again, I have them taking Allen Iverson in a close battle over Steve Nash. While Nash had a fantastic career, he took more time to develop and had less overall years at his peak, which truly lasted about 12 years compared to the 15 years of Iverson's peak. Allen came into the NBA and scored 23 points a game in his rookie year, dazzling the league with an incredible crossover and a seemingly limitless amount of energy. This energy, handle, incredible finishing ability, and jump shot was combined with him being one of the most incredible athletes the league has ever seen. Iverson could jump out of the gym, was lightning quick, and had incredible strength and body control through the air. This combination led to him leading the league in scoring 4 times and being named the league MVP in 2001. The Raptors did have a point guard in Damon Stoudamire, but he was also undersized and they would have likely had to trade him to take Iverson. Like the 76ers, the Raptors didn't have much other talent and would have ended up in a similar position in the next draft where they would take Tracy McGrady in 1997. But it is unlikely the Raptors would have then had the 4th pick and therefore would miss out on Vince Carter. Instead, they would have the answer and T-Mac. Maybe McGrady never leaves as he is the sole star on the wing and he and Iverson form an incredibly tough duo to stop from scoring. Iverson in the North would have been huge for Canadian basketball as Vince was, and could have gone down as the franchise's greatest player. The big question would have been, would he eventually have left just like most of Toronto's early stars? Next in the draft was Canada's other team, the Vancouver Grizzlies, and they make what is one of the most interesting picks in terms of the potential impact on the league by taking Steve Nash 3rd overall. Nash is obviously from Canada, and the Grizzlies getting a homegrown star who would eventually become a 2-time MVP could have prevented the franchise from ever moving and allowed Canada to continue to have 2 teams. Nash took about 4 years to really grow into his skill set in the league, but after this he would begin to average 15 points and 7 assists on some of the best shooting splits in the league, before eventually averaging around 16 points and 10 assists for an 8-year stretch. If the Grizzlies held on to Nash, maybe the hometown crowd attaches to their own star and own team a little bit more, and the team never struggles with fans. The biggest problem with the Grizzlies was, however, their losing. They never won over 20 games in their first 4 years in the league, and won 22 and 23 games before being relocated. While he took time to develop into the transcendent point guard he was, Nash was still a steady hand that played solid team basketball. Perhaps he was what they needed to win games and begin to develop talent in the team instead of squandering it. The end result would have been Memphis never having a team, and maybe the Grizzlies never trade Pau Gasol to the Lakers. Instead, Pau gets to stay in Vancouver for his whole career with an all-time great point guard that was one of the best ever at setting up big men. The incredibly skilled duo would have been a force to reckon with, and if surrounded by enough shooting, would have been incredibly fun to watch. But at the same time, the league might never get to see Dirk and Nash team up, and Nash never makes his way to Phoenix. In this timeline, maybe Mike D'Antoni doesn't unleash the 7 seconds or less offense, and three-point shooting takes a little longer before it takes over the league. It is fast becoming obvious just how much these draft decisions affect the team and the league overall. But what is interesting is how this revisionist history is in fact bad for the next team. With the 4th pick, the Milwaukee Bucks would take Ray Allen, a future Hall of Famer. And now you might be asking why this is bad. Well, in 1996, the Milwaukee Bucks actually took Stephen Marbury and then traded him to the Timberwolves for Ray Allen and a future first-round pick. So now, they still get Allen, but miss out on a future first-round pick, making their team worse in the long run. But getting one of the best shooting guards of all time and one of the best three-point shooters ever is a fantastic result. Allen originally played 7 years in Milwaukee, and in this time he averaged 20 points a game and shot 40% from 3. In these early days, he was incredibly athletic and could dunk all over opposition players. And the Bucks actually saw success with Allen, making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals in the 2000 and 2001 season. Here, Allen would go up against Allen Iverson, who was having one of the greatest playoff runs ever. In Game 6, Allen would bury 41 points and take it to a Game 7. But the answer was too much and would eliminate the Bucks before going on to lose to the Lakers in the finals. And what happened next is horrific for Milwaukee fans. They had Ray Allen locked up on a contract for 2 more years, but would trade him, Kevin Ollie, Ronald Murray, and a future first-round pick to the Supersonics for Gary Payton, who would leave the Bucks after that season to go to the LA Lakers. It is probably one of the most short-sighted moves of all time and would set the Bucks back in a huge way, proving that even with the ability to draft perfectly, some teams will still find ways to stuff it all up. And then you have the Timberwolves, the other team involved in the classic Ray Allen trade. But this trade would severely hamper the Timberwolves, and the ability to escape it is perfect for them. They would get to keep their future first round pick and add another talent to place next to Garnett, and could draft a player who wouldn't leave them in 3 years like Stephen Marbury. Instead, I have the Timberwolves drafting Jermaine O'Neal. I think they would also consider Peja Stojakovic here, but the fact that he came over 2 years later means that Garnett would have to wait aeons for the talent to arrive. O'Neal posed similar problems as he was the youngest player to debut in an NBA game until Andrew Bynum eclipsed him. However, he would eventually develop into a defensive powerhouse who also averaged 20 points and 10 rebounds from around 2001 until 2007. This 6-year stretch perfectly aligns with Kevin Garnett's own prime. He would also play the center position, and him and KG would form a defensive and offensive big man duo that would make people around the league shudder with fear back in those slower paced days. This could have completely changed league history, as the Timberwolves would have had a bruising 7-footer to put up against Shaquille O'Neal in the 2004 Western Conference Finals. With Garnett and O'Neal alongside Sam Cassell and the volatile but talented Latrell Sprewell, they may have been good enough to take down the Lakers and eventually the Detroit Pistons. And then once again they would have had enough talent to continue to compete as O'Neal and Garnett dominate together throughout the 2000s. This would have the effect of both stars not needing to take on as much pressure, and maybe O'Neal suffers less injuries as a result. It could also mean that KG never gets traded to the Boston Celtics and finishes his career as a Timberwolf, and the Celtics never pull off the biggest trade steal against Billy King and the Brooklyn Nets. The ripple effect is huge, but incredibly beneficial for KG, Jermaine O'Neal, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Up next is the Boston Celtics, who I have selecting Marcus Camby. Marcus was a fantastic defensive player. He would win the Defensive Player of the Year award and would lead the league in blocks in 4 separate seasons. He was also a double-double machine who would score 10 points and grab 12 plus rebounds every single game in the prime of his career. But perhaps the biggest reason for Boston to take him is the consistency of Camby over a long period of time. He played 19 years in the league, and even though he suffered small injuries in a lot of these seasons, he would always come back the same guy. Energy, dunking, rebounds, and protecting the rim. Boston would then pair him with Chauncey Billups and Paul Pierce in back-to-back drafts, and maybe they never trade Billups. In this timeline, they have one of the great team-leading point guards, one of the great defensive bigs, and a fantastic wing scorer. Maybe this Boston team could go on to win a championship before 2007 if they manage themselves correctly and don't make bad deals. This is possible as the Celtics had Rick Fox on the roster and could have kept him if they knew they'd be contending in a few seasons. After the Celtics comes the Clippers, who at this point are one of the historically worst franchises in the league. And the man to save them is none other than Stephen Marbury, who we all know wanted to be in a big city, big market, and leading a team to victory. Well, the Clippers in 1996 had absolutely no point guards and had a decent distribution of role players on their team. Marbury would have been able to come in and lead the team and take most of the shots and ball handling responsibilities. This would allow him to star, but in a situation where he had some decent support. I think the results would have been great, and Marbury had a stretch of 11 years where he averaged 20 points and 8-ish assists a game. If he did this for the Clippers, they might have actually been able to develop into a team that could challenge the Shaq-led Lakers, leading to one of the best Clippers and Lakers rivalries we have seen. But Marbury was a bit of a risk in terms of managing him for the fact that he switched teams frequently. The Clippers would be taking a big risk, but I think they need to swing for the fences and hope they could convince Starbury to stay with the team long term. But if they could, the LA Lights could do wonders for their star. With the 8th pick in the draft, I have the New Jersey Nets selecting Peja Stojakovic. Peja was one of those players that looks and plays like he belongs in this current era of basketball. He was a leanly built 6'10" who played like a shooting guard and small forward, but would be perfectly positioned to play as a small ball 4 in the current era of the game. Over his career, he shot 40% from deep, could score from all over the ground, and was a decent defender as well. He had a consistent career over 13 years in the NBA and would be a great pickup for the Nets here. And what would be particularly exciting about this pickup is that the fact that the Nets would eventually acquire Jason Kidd in 2001. That 2001-2002 Nets teams would have been devastating, as they could have started Jefferson and Stojakovic for Kerry Kittles, who they actually drafted in 1996, and Todd McCulloch. This would have seen them with one of the first small ball lineups that had 3 shooters, a point guard, and a big man down low in Kenyon Martin. It would have been a fascinating team to watch as Peja dropped 21 points a game in that season and would have been the scoring threat the Nets so desperately needed to become a championship team. And then in 2003-2004, Peja would shoot 43% from deep and drop 24 points a game playing for the Kings. But who knows how good he could have been when he played with Kidd. Jason was one of the best distributors the game has ever seen, and Stojakovic is one of those extremely high IQ players that would benefit immensely from having such a great point guard. This Nets team might have been able to win a championship in the era of basketball where Iverson is on the Raptors and Kobe Bryant isn't teaming up with Shaq as he develops into one of the best players in the world. How different would the NBA be if the Nets had won a championship? Could they have challenged the Knicks for relevance in the city of New York? Who knows? But the Sacramento Kings would lose out on one of their key pieces in that Chris Webber team and would rue the day that drafts were redone with hindsight. Next up at number 9 is the Dallas Mavericks, who would be taking Shareef Abdul-Rahim. Shareef could have potentially gone even higher as his prime was of a great level, but he only played at a top level for 8 seasons, and for this reason I have him going 9th. Shareef was a 6'9" forward who could play both the 3 and 4 with relative ease. He was a fantastic athlete with his lean frame and could get up and down the court at great pace. This speed also allowed him to challenge his opposing 4s who would struggle to guard him in the half court and in transition. And while he was so fast and was tough for them to guard, he also wasn't a liability on the other end of the court. Shareef averaged 8 to 10 rebounds in the prime of his career and used his vertical ability to contest opposing forward shots. He was also a gifted passer, and the ball ran through his hands a fair bit for the time for that era of the NBA. Like Peja, Shareef probably would have fared better in the modern NBA when coaches knew how to use tall, talented ball handlers a bit better. He would have begun his career by playing with Jason Kidd, and would have then likely been joined by Steve Nash and Dirk Nowitzki just a few years later. Such a lineup could have been fantastic if given the time to grow and develop, and maybe Dirk gets more than one ring. The last player we'll take a look at for this redraft is Antoine Walker, who goes 10th overall to the Indiana Pacers. Walker went 6th overall in the original draft and had one of the best careers in the early years after the 1996 draft. He would contribute immediately by scoring 18 points and grabbing 9 rebounds a game, while also dishing 3 assists. He would also then develop a 3-point shot and averaged around 20 to 22 points a game in the first 7 games of his career before it all went downhill. This 7-year period would be perfect for the Pacers, who already had Reggie Miller and Mark Jackson on their squad. The Pacers had a big centre in Dale Davis, and Walker would have slotted in perfectly at the 4 before they were eventually joined by Jalen Rose to fill in at the 3. This starting 5 lineup would have been able to shoot threes from every single position, and Walker might have helped them with their rebounding issues while also giving them a way to score inside the paint a bit more. Perhaps this would have been the difference between them winning and losing against the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals in 1998, and the Walker and the Pacers' history might be just that little bit different. That's it for this draft, guys, but you can quickly see that the 1996 draft was one of the greatest drafts ever. You can also see how revisionist history can change the league so quickly, and how just one decision makes for huge changes around the league. No Shaq and Kobe, AI in Canada. Vancouver never moves to Memphis. The Timberwolves have a big man duo to take down Shaq in the Western Conference, and Peja Stojakovic never plays for the Kings. The NBA is a whole different world. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications as well.